All right, well, thank you once again to my friend Lindsay Hartz for joining us today. We are going to do another video segment on reckless driving in Virginia, and in particular today we are going to talk about the most frequently asked questions that people come up with when they call our office and ask for help with a reckless driving charge. So let's go ahead and begin with number one, Lindsay. The number one question, what is going to happen in my case?
Well, that's so different for everybody's case, Van, but I think we can give a few pointers that apply to everyone. Generally, in these cases, there's three options. You can plead guilty, which, if you have any chance of getting this reduced, we don't advise. You can send a lawyer to court, and generally we can stand in for you unless you've gone way, way, way over the speed limit and blown the trees back. And then the third option is for you to come to court and do a little public speaking on your own. But generally that's how we at least start off.
Yes, that's usually the beginning. And then from there, we just really have to see which judge is going to be on the bench, because so much of your case depends on who is hearing the case and who's going to decide guilt or innocence, and then of course punishment. So the real question is, who's going to be sitting on the bench? The real answer, nobody knows. A lot of lawyers will tell you, don't worry, your case will be fine, Judge Jones is on the bench. And unfortunately, sometimes Judge Jones expires that night, you walk into court, the next morning there's a new judge on the bench you've never seen in your entire life who proceeds to find all of your clients guilty. So nobody really knows what's going to happen in a client's case. The real bottom line is the best thing to do is to prepare the strongest defense you can, and at that point you're going to want to let a good lawyer present that if you're not accustomed to public speaking, certainly.
Absolutely.
Number two question, why is your fee higher or lower than X? And Lindsay, I know you got this question a lot of times from people who are saying, why is your fee lower than this other lawyer when you worked at high volume practice?
That's correct. When I worked in a high volume practice, I got the question all the time, why are your fees somewhere in the neighborhood of $150, $200 when I'm getting other letters and other attorneys are telling me that their fees are somewhere around $500, as much as $1,500. What makes your fee so much different? Well, the easy answer is there's two schools of thought, high volume and what I like to call high results. High volume, generally, they want as many traffic cases as they can stack on any given day. As you can imagine, $50, $150 cases, that's a pretty good day for a lawyer. But how much do you really know about those 50 clients is the question. The other school of thought is higher representation, as far as focusing in on each client's case and focusing on that case at hand rather than a multitude of cases. It's just two different schools of thought. Some attorneys enjoy the high volume practice, some attorneys enjoy focusing more time on individual clients.
Very well said, Lindsay. I think another good point is to sort of take it from the other perspective. I've been asked since I started my own solo practice specializing in reckless driving, and started charging the same fees that other members of the Virginia Traffic Defense Dream Team charge. How come your fees are higher than another lawyer? And I explained to them that they have a dedicated paralegal with my firm, that they're going to get a guarantee that the case results will be to their satisfaction, or else we'll appeal it to the circuit court at no additional charge. The client also gets a very detailed evidence request letter that tells them exactly what kind of evidence to provide tailored to their case. Yes. And then of course the paralegal helps hold their hand as they go through the process. So it's a different client Absolutely. Experience and a different sort of customer service interface.
Absolutely. Much different than a high volume practice where it's more paralegal time than attorney time, as it has to be, you can imagine, with that number of clients.
Exactly. Let's go on to number three. Question that we frequently are asked is, am I going to jail?
Well, that's the worst case scenario, isn't it, Van? And I don't blame clients for asking that. That would be my first question is, am I going to jail? Especially because I got 4 postcards and 6 letters that said it's a possibility. And they didn't tell me it wasn't a possibility at 81 and a 70. That's still reckless driving, right? Jail varies across the state, but there are very few judges that put people in jail for 81 and a 70. But that's kind of people's worst fear, so I certainly understand that question.
Right. I mean, nobody wants to get locked up, and certainly in a place that's far from home, that is just not a scenario that most people are interested in. And unfortunately, there are some judges, as you know, throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia that will lock people up for one thing and one thing only, and that is excessive speed. As you know, it was news when a few years ago judges started locking people up at 90.
90.
And recently we've seen folks from the courthouse records and from other attorneys that have represented them being locked up in the 80s.
Yes.
So that's scary. Question number 4, what's the worst that can happen, people want to know?
Oh, all the time. I suppose for me the worst thing would be spending a night in jail. That's not on my radar. I hope never to have to go there. But that is generally what I tell people. The worst that can happen is that the judge could decide to lock you up, and it doesn't even have to be for excessive speed. Things like being rude with a police officer, or God forbid, combative with a police officer. It's almost a first-class ticket to jail.
Very good point. We certainly know of a judge that used to sit in a nearby jurisdiction that would be very reasonable, and you could usually get him to help your client out unless that client had gotten crossways with the police officer, cursed the police officer, any of that kind of thing. Definitely would get you a first-class ticket to the Gray Bar Hotel. But the worst that can happen is very unusual, and it would be very rare for somebody to get the maximum sentence of $2,500 fine, 12-month license suspension, and a year in jail. But a good attorney is certainly going to make sure that we're looking at something at the lowest possible end of the spectrum
Absolutely.
for every client. Let's go on to number 5. People always ask, what is a misdemeanor and how can that affect my life?
Well, what is a misdemeanor? That one question could take up all of our time today. But a misdemeanor is basically a lower level criminal offense than a felony.
Right.
Reckless driving is charged as a class 1 misdemeanor, which is akin to a DUI or brandishing your weapon in an unlawful way. A misdemeanor can have a serious impact on your life. Our friends in the military, they certainly more than most suffer from a misdemeanor. Anyone in law enforcement, anyone in the nursing or medical field. Anytime you have to have your record run for any reason, that criminal offense is coming up. And it can really be detrimental, especially in an economy where there aren't a surplus of jobs anyway.
True, and Virginia is notorious for having the lowest level of tolerance for people that are speeding. As you know, and as we always tell people, 11 over the limit will get you a class 1 misdemeanor. Folks don't realize that's the same as possession of marijuana. Shoplifting, class 1 misdemeanor would include DUI, domestic abuse, there's all kinds of things, so it's kind of heavy-handed, but we try and educate folks and let them know, hey, if there's a way to fight this, definitely don't, if you don't have a criminal record, don't get one over this.
No.
All right, number 6, that's one that we hear a lot, isn't it?
Yes, what evidence do I need?
What
man?
evidence do I need?
All of it is the short answer, isn't it?
The best evidence we can put together, and that really is what I try and do. My basic approach is to put together what I call an avalanche of evidence. Every good thing that the client can provide me, which of course would include things like a good driving record, a calibration certificate, a driver improvement clinic certificate, transcripts that show that my client is a student and maybe should get a little bit of help because they're a young person trying to make their way in the world. You also have things like gasoline receipts. You can use those to do a time and distance calculation and figure out a person's average speed. So the bottom line is we want as much as we can get, but what's your short answer to folks that ask that?
My short answer is lawyers love paper. We're a rare breed that love everything in writing in triplicate, if you will. So if you think we could possibly benefit from some piece of paper, send it to us, please. We'll sort it out and we'll decide what's best for your case. But if when in doubt, send it in.
Very good point. Most of our cases are made on documents. Let's go to number 7. Number 7 is a question that we get frequently from the folks out of state.
Yes, do I have to come to court? Do I have to go back to that place that gave me this awful reckless driving ticket, or can I drive around it for the rest of my life? I hear that all the time. Generally, no. Unless you were crazy enough to get out and deck the officer in the face or blow the trees back at 170. Generally not. Generally we can stand in for you. Now certainly that depends on the judge and his requirements, as well as any prosecution requirements. So ask your attorney about that, but most of the time we can stand in, especially for our out-of-state clients.
And it's unfortunately something that's not very concrete, because in Virginia there's no statute that says what speed you have to appear or what speed a judge will issue a warrant called a capias for your arrest. So we really never know, but usually the rule of thumb is if a client was below 90 miles an hour, they usually can be tried in their absence. Some judges will allow any person from out of state to be tried in their absence. But it really just depends on the
Varies.
judge, and as we said before, we really never know what we're getting until we get there. All right, question number 8. Can you make a deal with the prosecutor beforehand? We've certainly heard that a number of times, and what's the answer?
I wish we could more than we can. In a lot of courts, the prosecutor's not even really interested until you get over 100. They've got enough craziness going on over 100, criminal offenses, things that take up their time. So believe it or not, if you're going 81 and a 70, a lot of times the prosecutor doesn't know anything about your case. Some jurisdictions are different. Some jurisdictions always have a prosecutor there, but in a general sense, no deals before court. It's generally worked out on the day of trial.
True, and that's a very good point. Normally, the 15 minutes or so before trial is when everything comes together. The police officer is there to give his input, which is always important to the prosecutor. Having prosecuted many cases, I know that you never make a deal without having your police officer on board. So the prosecutor is there, the judge who can approve the deal is there, and of course every plea deal in Virginia has to be approved by a judge. So plea deals in advance are relatively rare. We don't see them a whole lot. Question number 9. Certainly a question that people get these days, right?
How do I know which lawyer is best for me with all these letters? I've had people tell me they've gotten anywhere from 15 to 30. Depending on where you're mailing, Greensville, you may get 30 letters. And how do you know? You've never met any of us. You don't even live in this state. How do you know which one of us is right for you? We might have a picture on there. We might have a price point. We might have some funny little quotes. But how do you know which one of us is best for you? Call everyone. You'll be able to tell, I promise you, who's good and who's not.
That's true, and a lot of times even after only calling a small number of folks, you realize that there are some offices that emphasize customer service more. There are other offices that emphasize a low price. You know, there's a lawyer for everybody, and for every lawyer there's also an ideal client.
Yes.
And usually folks do a pretty good job of matching themselves up with the lawyer that's going to represent them best based on their expectations of the case, the lawyer's level of expertise, and the amount of time and effort that that attorney is planning on putting into the case, which is usually reflected by the fee. Number 10, this is a really good one, and we've both been asked this question. Maybe not one of the most frequently asked questions, but people will sometimes say, I'm really well connected. Can you just get the case dismissed? How does that work out, Lindsay?
I've not been able to locate my magic wand in quite some time, so not usually. Even people that are really, really well connected, politicians, judges, they don't get their cases dismissed. It's rare. It's so rare. There's times in Virginia where your case would be dismissed if your officer was transferred, or if there were other circumstances that made it such that really a dismissal was in the correct, realm of possibilities. But just because of your connections, I'm sorry to say, Virginia doesn't have much sympathy for that.
That's a very good point. I've represented some judges and some politicians, and their charges did wind up being dismissed, but not really specifically because of who they were or what their connections were. It was a well-prepared case and a reasonable prosecutor, as well as a judge who was willing to accept our proposal. But, the bottom line is that a lot of folks, especially from, it seems like New York and New Jersey, expect that connections or family ties to someone that's in a police department will help them out down here the same way that things operate up there.
Not
and I
at all.
certainly wish that was the case, because that would make our lives a lot easier.
Wouldn't it?
But here in Virginia, it seems like every victory that you want to get in court, you kind of have to, if not fight for, at least provide a very solid foundation.
Certainly,
To get your
certainly. I think we
prosecutor.
both had even law enforcement officers from other states stop. So professional courtesy down here, not so much.
True, I've represented troopers from other states, and boy, it's a rude awakening. They can't
It
believe
is.
they're being ticketed.
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, as always, it's been a pleasure. Lindsay Hartz, thank you very much for
Thank you,
joining
Van.
me. And I look forward to speaking with you again and helping to educate folks that are facing the Virginia traffic court system. Thanks very much and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.